All right, let's jump right into this explainer and unpack a truly fascinating sermon that directly contrasts the popular cultural idea of avatars with the specific biblical doctrine of the Incarnation. Today, we're diving into a detailed theological source that breaks down exactly how different worldviews understand the concept of God interacting with the earth, and why the Christian perspective claims a radically different, singular event. I mean, why does it actually matter if God shows up once or 1,000 times? Well, it fundamentally changes how we view life, consequence, and eternity, which is exactly what we're going to unpack today. To give us a quick roadmap, we're hitting 5 key areas today, starting with popular views on avatars, then the biblical truth of a single event, why it only happened once, the final sacrifice, and finally, identifying Jesus as Yahweh. Let's get to it. So, Section 1, Popular Views on Avatars. Let's look at how different worldviews actually understand God interacting with humanity or humans returning after death. It's super fascinating how the source breaks down the terminology here. The speaker emphasizes this Hindi term, dehe dharan, noting that it aligns perfectly with the Latin root for incarnation, literally taking on flesh. Culturally, this implies a total physical grounding in humanity, which the source uses to clearly separate the biblical event from the everyday understanding of avatars. You see, an avatar usually implies a temporary, kind of recurring appearance. Honestly, it's almost like putting on a costume. But dehedaran, that implies becoming something entirely new, permanently fusing the divine right into the physical. And the historical context provided shows just how incredibly varied global beliefs truly are. According to the source, Hinduism teaches that God takes multiple avatars to fix mistakes on Earth, while humans endure a staggering 8.4 million life cycles based on their karma. Buddhism also leans into these cycles of reincarnation. But get this, historical context reveals that even some first-century followers of Judaism actually believed dead prophets, like Elijah, could be reborn to finish their work. That's exactly why some folks back then thought Jesus or John the Baptist was actually Elijah reborn. Meanwhile, the speaker points out that Islam strictly rejects the idea that God becomes human or that people return at all. And Sikhism? It teaches that God sends human gurus, but the supreme God himself absolutely does not take human form. All right, moving right along to Section 2, what the source terms the biblical truth of a singular event. Here, the text really zeroes in on the exact nature of the Christian doctrine. And right away, the source hits us with this massive theological contrast. While worldly philosophies and cultural traditions generally expect continuous rebirths, recurring avatars to fix past mistakes, correct uncompleted missions, or destroy evil, the biblical view insists on something totally different. The core Christian claim here is that God took human form, that day at Harn, exactly one time. It's not a cycle, it's a definitive, singular moment in history for ultimate salvation. For ancient cultures that were completely steeped in the idea of endless cyclical time, this claim of a one-time historical interruption by the Creator was a radically shocking concept. The source actually grounds this once-for-all belief straight in Scripture, pointing to 1 Timothy 3:16. The speaker notes that the Creator stepping into human flesh was this profoundly mysterious yet completely singular historical event. The sermon emphasizes it was something angels witnessed and the world believed in. But yeah, it remains a deep mystery. I mean, it completely defies standard human logic that an infinite God became a finite man and did it just the one time. Which brings us right to Section 3. Why just one incarnation? This is where the theological logic of the sermon gets incredibly deep. So here is the million-dollar question. If God became a human, why did he only do it once? Right? If there is still suffering and sin out there in the world, like the cultural view points out, why wouldn't God just take on an avatar multiple times to keep fixing it? Well, to answer that, we really have to look at the rules of the game. The speaker introduces this strict, completely unbending rule of human existence found in Hebrews 9:27. According to the text, the universal rule for humanity is strictly one life, one death, and then judgment. The whole argument here is that if the Creator was genuinely going to enter the human experience, he couldn't use cheat codes. No way. He had to play by the exact same rules as the rest of us. Because he genuinely became a man, he subjected himself entirely to the absolute boundaries that govern all mortal humanity. Building on that logic, because God chose to become fully human, he literally had only one chance, one lifetime, one death. The source really stresses this. Jesus didn't get multiple lives to try and save humanity over the centuries. He had a single, incredibly pressurized opportunity to accomplish his entire mission, take the judgment upon himself, and actually succeed. And that perfectly sets us up for Section 4, the ultimate final sacrifice. Because Jesus only had this one human life to live, what he did with it had to be entirely comprehensive. To really show why a new sacrifice was needed, the speaker describes the old, highly inefficient priestly system. Picture this. Flawed, sinful high priests had this grueling daily routine. First, they had to ritually wash themselves. Then, they had to offer a sacrifice for their own personal sins. And only after all that could they finally even attempt to offer a sacrifice for the people's sins. And they had to do this over and over and over again, day after day, just an endless loop of temporary fixes. By contrasting these two systems, the source explains a totally monumental shift. That old system was repetitive and flawed simply because the men running it were sinful themselves. But the sermon argues that because Jesus was perfect, his single sacrifice permanently rendered the old system completely obsolete. Under this worldview, he didn't need to wash himself of sin, so his one-time sacrifice covered the people instantly and permanently, literally breaking that cycle of repetition forever. According to the sermon, this single Didudaran achieved 3 monumental victories that no continuous cycle of avatars ever could. It began by permanently bearing and taking away the sins of many, dealing with the absolute root problem of humanity. Building right on that, the source claims this act completely destroyed the paralyzing fear of death because the grave was ultimately conquered. And finally, referencing 1 John 3, verse 8, the speaker states this singular event rendered Satan completely powerless, destroying his works, which the sermon identifies as worldly afflictions like sickness and curses. One life, one death, total victory. Which brings us to our final part, Section 5, identifying Jesus as Yahweh. In this section, the source drops its boldest theological claim regarding the true identity of the one who took on flesh. This part is fascinating because it shows how the early apostles connected the dots to make a truly staggering claim. The speaker notes that back in the Old Testament, the prophet Joel said, "Anyone who calls on the name of Yahweh, the sacred personal name of God in the Old Testament, will be saved." But jump to the New Testament, and Paul applies that exact same verse directly to Jesus. Same thing with Isaiah, who prophesied about a messenger preparing the way for Yahweh. The Gospel of Matthew explicitly states John the Baptist was that messenger, preparing the way for Jesus. The source argues the apostles clearly understood Jesus wasn't just a good teacher or some newly created being. No, he was the actual sacred creator of the Old Testament, walking right there among them in human form. And the speaker points out this really tragic irony found in the Gospel of John. The creator of the universe actually emptied himself to become a servant. He stepped right into the very world he created, walked among the people he literally fashioned, and yet, the source points out that the world largely failed to recognize him. He was right there, the invisible God made completely visible, and so many just totally missed it. So as we wrap up this explainer, we want to leave you with this really profound thought drawn straight from the source material. If this one-time incarnation actually happened, if the creator of the universe subjected himself to the strict rule of one life and one death just to reach humanity, how does that singular historical event change the way you view eternity today?